Do you know what this symbol is? Of course you do. It's the save icon. You press that and all your work is magically saved to your desktop or the cloud so you can access it again later. But let's take a step back. What is it actually? And I know, a lot of you just gave the biggest sighs of your lives. And I think I heard someone through their computer screen. Because only people born after a certain year wouldn't know what this is. But how about this symbol? Well, it's the Bluetooth symbol that lets you connect your phone to a speaker. But what is it, really? Well, you might be surprised to learn that this is actually a composite rune based on the name of an ancient Norse leader, Harald Bluetooth. That's right, an ancient rune used in everyday technology. Or how about this symbol? That's the @ symbol. It lets you communicate with people across the world through email. But you might be surprised to learn that this originated as an accounting symbol, standing for at the rate of. You would use it if you needed to calculate how much profit you made in a day. If you sold 5 apples at the market, you might put 5 apples at the rate of $3 an apple. And boom, you knew how much money you made. It wasn't until the 1970s when a computer programmer named Ray Tomlinson was trying to figure out a way to communicate between computers. He needed a symbol, rarely used, and ultimately he settled on this one. And because of that one decision, this symbol was resurrected from its ancient past and brought into the modern world. In fact, digital images like this have become something of a meme, showcasing the nostalgic divide between older generations and younger, between millennials who grew up with this sound, and Gen Zers who grew up with 4K internet in the palms of their hands from the moment they could walk, maybe even before. And the more we dig into these kinds of things, the more we realize that our world is filled with echoes of the past like this. And they're not just relegated to images. They inhabit the ways we communicate with each other, the phrases that we use. For example, what about the phrase devil's advocate? Originally, this referred to an actual person. You see, in the Catholic Church, when they were trying to figure out if someone should become a saint or not, they would have a sort of tribunal. A person arguing for sainthood and a person arguing against it, the devil's advocate. Now when we use the term, it usually refers to someone who simply is disagreeing with someone else. It's lost most of its religious import, aside from the fact that it's still called devil's advocate. But the phrase still exists, showing that the ghost of that original use remains and lingers. Or how about the phrase going Dutch? This originated in the 17th century when England and the Netherlands were in a series of naval trade wars. Phrases like going Dutch, Dutch uncle, Dutch courage, these were slurs used to imply stinginess or cowardice. Now, of course, going Dutch simply means splitting the bill, a casual act of fairness. It's been stripped of its xenophobic mockery. But that nationalism still lingers in the phrase every time we use it. Or how about cut and paste? Everyone knows what you mean when you say that now, even though the physical act of cutting something out and pasting it into something else has become all but obsolete. That original intention has been stripped away, but the phrase and its implications remain. And this doesn't even include all the phrases coined by Shakespeare that we still use. Phrases like too much of a good thing, or to wear one's heart on one's sleeve, or even the word night owl, which became associated with people and not just the animal through Shakespeare's use of the term in his early poetry and the play Twelfth Night. All of these are ghosts of bygone eras that influence the way we interact with the world today. We may not speak like Shakespeare, but he still influences the way we communicate with each other. We may not use dial-up modems or typewriters, but they still influence how we interact with technology. We may live in 2025, but 2025 is composed of centuries. And yes, I hear you, Mike. Who cares? So what if we use phrases or symbols without knowing their origin? And I get it, you're right. Who cares if a 13-year-old doesn't know that this is a floppy disk, something that you would insert into a computer? The only people who are going to care about that are people trying to hold on to older ways of life, or people trying to mock younger generations. Who cares if a teenager doesn't know how to write in cursive? They're never going to use it anyway. You know, I remember always being frustrated in school when we'd ask the teacher why we couldn't use a calculator instead of having to write everything out on a piece of paper. And the teacher would always respond, "You're not going to have a calculator in your pocket when you're an adult." Well, who's laughing now, Miss Reynolds? Who's laughing now? And I know, the point was not to memorize the Pythagorean theorem because you were going to need it in your retail job. The point was to understand complex problem-solving skills so that when you were an adult, you could solve things and understand how to solve them. But what this revealed was a gap in meaning, not understanding why an older way of doing something was still relevant today. Of course, we're still looking at symbols, and we could take this in the direction of, say, nuclear semiotics, discussing the ways that nuclear waste might haunt future generations and how we would explain that spectral danger to generations who speak in different tongues. And admittedly, this is a great example of the way that the present can haunt future timescapes. But for the sake of our exploration, I think it more apt to look at the way that these specters haunt the present in ways that are not just physical instantiations of communication. We might call these specters poltergeists, because rather than just reminders of the past, they directly influence how we live today. Rather than the innocuous nostalgia of a floppy disk icon, these poltergeists are cultural hauntings, possessing entire societies and cultures. These are not just revenants of the past, these are continuations of it, dressed up in modern garb and gambits. The French philosopher Jacques Derrida gives us a good idea for examining these ghosts. He called it hauntology. If you're wondering where the word comes from, it's a French pun that doesn't really translate well into English. It's a combination of the words haunt, meaning haunt, and ontology, meaning the study of being. But because you don't pronounce the H in French, it just sounds like you're saying ontology. Again, it doesn't really translate that well. And full disclosure, when Derrida originally coined the term, he used it to refer to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992 and the ghost of communism that was left in its wake. The book he wrote was literally called Spectres of Marx. I'm not going to use it this way, because I think that hauntology can be applied to a much wider area than just political ideology. I'm also not going to take this in the direction of Mark Fisher, who used it to refer to retrofuturism and the way that the past envisioned what the future would look like, and what the future actually looks like. Because while I like Mark Fisher and think his ideas are important, I think that he expands the term beyond what even Derrida had in mind. Instead, I think we can use hauntology to examine the ways that ghosts influence our lives as individuals, societies, and cultures, with or without us knowing. Those things that have long since lost their original meaning and become something detached. The things that meant something at one point, but now mean something entirely different, even if we still describe them in the same ways. Take, for example, the ghost of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment promised light, to cast out shadows, to make the world legible, measurable, knowable. But the Enlightenment left behind its own kind of ghost, a ghost of clarity. We feel its presence whenever we talk about facts or rationality. The light was supposed to cleanse us. Reason, we say, will save us. It haunts our technology, our politics, even our medicine, a whisper that what is visible is real. It says that superstitions are behind us, that progress is inevitable, that the future will be bright as long as we believe in rationality. And yet, this same rational spirit is what led us to the horrors of World War II, to the devastation in Vietnam, to a world of fear after 2001 and 2020. In each of these instances, rationality was used to defend actions that were otherwise incomprehensible. As long as an action had a cause, some theory or ideology, it was justified by the people enacting it. The Enlightenment sought to exorcise the sacred, but in doing so, it anointed reason as its own kind of God, unseen, omnipresent, punishing those who doubt it. And I wouldn't be too quick to say that these people were just using rationality as a scapegoat, especially considering how many of us use the same reasoning, pun intended, today. I mean, radical thinkers of the 1930s wrote detailed and otherwise impressive monographs and treatises on why their particular viewpoint was correct, often to great success and support. We may not always sit down today to write out our manifesto, but we do still rely on our reason to support our own positions and ideas, even if we're doing so in a disingenuous way. When we have arguments with our loved ones or hear heated debates on some silly "we're finding common ground" YouTube channel, our reason tells us why our arguments are correct and those others are wrong, why our view of a past action is accurate while our partner's is mistaken. In short, it allows us to scapegoat emotion with reason. And this specter of enlightenment continues to haunt how we view each other on a fundamental level. It haunts us as a spectre of what Sartre once called the analytic frame of mind. In this frame, man is reduced to a fixed human nature, free only in abstraction, detached from the stubborn weight of class, history, or circumstance. This analytic ghost whispers that freedom is innate rather than situated, that the beggar and the banker are equally free, differing only in will. It's a freedom that's emptied of struggle, a freedom that doesn't dirty its hands. This bootstrap mentality, with its moral optimism and its quiet cruelty, is one of this ghost's more visible possessions. The haunting persistence of a belief that equality has already been achieved and that those who fall simply refuse to rise. Against existential freedom, defined by our thrownness into situation, this ghost offers a comforting lie that we are already free and therefore already absolved. When something goes wrong in our lives, we have only ourselves to blame and must face that fact. We develop self-help cultures that promise to teach you, for a fee, how to optimize yourself so you can be the best person you can be. Therapies as soteriology, where the goal is not to uncover some deeper understanding of the self, but to improve oneself for some future goal. Even social media confessionals, where we garner pity or sympathy for our mistakes as a means of making them more bearable. The very logic that was meant to free us now surveils us in algorithms and diagnostics, measuring, classifying, and predicting. We become haunted by the light. Of course, rationality and reason are not always in our face. We don't often go around saying, "Wow, I'm a rational and free agent. Thanks, Monsieur Enlightenment." And I suppose that's the reason we're haunted by it. After all, these things wouldn't really be ghosts if they were in our face. But what about those parts of our lives that are in front of us? Those memories that seem to coat our existence in a layer of nostalgia and regret. More importantly, those memories that help us to feel ahead of past societies. Echoes of things like the Industrial Revolution, or World War II's fascism, or perhaps more cliched, the Salem witch trials of the 17th century, made especially famous through American high school's love of Arthur Miller's The Crucible, taught to us usually as a memorial to the superstitious evils of a past generation. Cliched though they might be, the witch trials do offer us a great insight into how the past can haunt the future. I mean, if we look at what was at the foundation of these mass accusations, we find that the reasonings behind them continue to live today. I suppose you could offer many psychological answers to explain why they happened. A fear of the unknown, fear of the new, certain chemicals in the water that turned people to hysteria. But all of these whys culminate in the same what? A belief in an external threat that, if not routed, would tear the fabric of society apart. A hysteria that led to the manifestation of tangible opponents to be attacked. We're told of rampant but unfounded accusations against anyone some community member disliked. Sham trials where the evidence presented is flimsier than soggy bread. Punishments that seem cruel and contradictory, but nonetheless lauded as divinely inspired. Regardless of the psychological or social whys, the whats consolidate into a singular terror of popular opinion. Yet this is, most of the time, concluded with a joy that these events are of the past, silent tombs that exist only so we might pass by them and thank the heavens that we're not them. But are these tombs really silent? Do we not hear the spectral voices echoing through the steel and concrete of our cities? And sure, there have been seldom cases where the hysteria of that century has been invoked. We do not often go through a lesson on the Red Scare without referencing the similar witch hunts of earlier. In fact, the very phrase witch hunt has entered everyday language, especially recently. And I'm not going to make this a question of whether people understand the origin of that phrase. That's not the most important aspect of this haunting. Instead, I'd like to ask this question. Are those witch trials really dead and in the past? Are we really far removed from them? And I don't just mean because we use the term witch hunt. Let's dig deeper than that. Have we really escaped the what of these hysterics? In fact, the phrase witch hunt itself contradicts this idea that we've really moved on, not because we still use the term like devil's advocate, but because we so willingly use it to defend people we like from attack. We use the term witch hunt to do exactly what the witch hunts did, set up a tangible enemy and oppose them. Even in our memory, we fail to recognize this tie to the past. In a strange way, it's as though by using the term witch hunt, we forget what the witch hunts really were. Think of those times we don't supposedly recognize as witch hunts. How many times do we today believe in some existential threat that may or may not actually exist? Not only believe, but then act on those beliefs. The term gives us an excuse to think of ourselves as beyond the past, without having to actually investigate what is and isn't a witch hunt. Because we throw around the term, we think that they're easy to spot, and more importantly, that we are smart enough to spot them. We look back at Salem as a distant memory, a failing of superstition and immorality. But what if Salem continues to imperialize us today? How many of us look at, say, capitalism and immediately condemn it as some ward of evil that has to be opposed? Or take the word billionaire to be synonymous with immoral and irredeemable, using it as a quasi-slur? At the same time, how many of us participate in what I've heard lucidly called the woke scare, blaming rainbow flags for every tragedy from wildfires to hurricanes? How many times has the scant mention of pronoun or identity caused the same anger or fear that arose in the men who heard the word witch or magic? If we replace familiars with colored hair or rainbow pins and sudden onset sickness with mere criticism, our world starts to resemble 17th century Salem more and more. And that's not to say that none of these reactions are legitimate. Perhaps something really is a witch hunt, and perhaps something really is discrimination or oppression. These things certainly do exist, and it's important to reveal them. But I think the greater question here is, how many of us take the time to think about what is real and what is mere hysteria? How many of us take the time to question whether a ghost of the past really is haunting a present moment? Sometimes it seems that our intelligence, our scientism, deceives us and makes us think that we are more rational than we are. We don't believe in ghosts, so we can't see the hauntings that occur every day. We don't believe progress could be an illusion, so we can't see the ways we behave like our ancestors. Our world is one of facts and logic, so we can't see when we rely on superstition or stereotype over empiricism or experience. We live now, so we can't be like the past. But when we start demonizing everyone who even hints at being an ally, or everyone who isn't actively waving a national flag, that past casts a very living shadow over us. Some of us even have the confidence to say, if I were alive then, be it Salem or Birmingham or Germany, I wouldn't have let that happen. But how many of us let the same things happen today, simply because the same symbols aren't used? How many of us would actually have done something in one of these past societies, and how many of us would have found ourselves lining up with the hysterics and attacking the people we see only as retrospective victims? The ghosts of these past eras loom over us like ancestral watchers. Though they're not persistently present to us, the past always holds that question over us. Where would we have been when there were fewer grains of sand down the hourglass? We're not only indebted to the choices our ancestors made either. We are responsible in the same manner for the future humans who will call us their ancestors. We are caught, ever present, in the pull between past and future, irremovably trapped by those paths our ancestors took. And so we must ask, where would we have stood on that previous horizon of history? Not because it's a fun thought exercise, but because our future is intrinsically tied to that question. Relegating the past to a simple, I would have done this, without forcing that situation to its present crisis allows us to shirk the responsibility of actively making that choice. And yes, we're not actively choosing whether to burn someone at the stake or toss them rock-tied into a lake, but we are making choices that have a substantial impact on the way we live and the way future generations may live.
You know, I'm often kept up at night wondering, what am I not doing? What side of history am I going to show myself to be on by the actions I'm not taking? Is that something we can even determine from within the spectacle? Maybe we can't answer that question right now, but what we can do is ask ourselves, was that knock we heard, that creaking floorboard, that speech, that advertisement, really just the house settling? Wind rustling through the trees, the masses moving? Or perhaps was there something more there? Was there perhaps a ghost come back to haunt us?